tape on the brown paper let go with a small, ugly rip, like a scab pulled off too soon. James didn't breathe. I didn't either. The kitchen smelled like peeled oranges and bedtime shampoo, but underneath it was something colder. The scent of old power walking back into our lives. His fingers trembled over the wrapped painting he'd hidden for the day his father returned. And in that trembling, I saw it. How a grown man can still become a frightened boy in one heartbeat. If this canvas held the truth his mother saved, would it set him free? Or shatter the family we fought so hard to build? Folks, my heart breaks just telling this part. Before we see what happens next, please subscribe to support our stories. That morning, my heart felt light. Not happy light, borrowed light. Anna texted me a photo from home. Her care cards lined up in a neat row, each one with a smiling orange and a blessing written in her careful little hand. Nye sat beside her in a paper orange crown, clapping like she could applaud the whole village into kindness. I stared at their faces and thought, please, let this be the new normal. At Hill Fruits, the kindness corner jar was already half full with folded notes. James stood close at the counter, his hand brushing mine when the line got loud. Quiet comfort, the kind that steadies your ribs. Luan lingered by the gate like a bored cousin, but his eyes kept sweeping the road. Officer Thu rolled past once, slow, a silent promise. I'm watching. Then the street went wrong. A black sedan slid in. Too clean, too expensive. It parked one house away, like it wanted to be noticed without being challenged. A man stepped out in a pressed shirt and looked at our sign as if he'd been waiting to see it in real life. Mr. Hui drifted closer, pretending to inspect guavas. That car isn't from around here, he whispered. Big money, big trouble. I didn't answer because James's body answered for me. His shoulders tightened, his jaw set. His eyes stopped seeing fruit and started counting exits. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, and he kept smiling at customers like nothing had happened, like he could hold the past behind his teeth. He leaned in, voice low. Keep smiling. I'll handle this. My stomach dropped. I remembered the last time danger brushed our gate, how James had vanished to protect us, leaving me to explain to Anna why the house felt hollow. He didn't disappear because he was cruel. He disappeared because he was scared, and because he loves in a way that sacrifices first and asks questions later. I squeezed his hand under the counter. Not again, I begged without words. When the line finally thinned, he checked his phone. The color drained from his face so fast it made my throat go dry. He turned the screen away, then looked at me with a calm that felt practiced. He's here, he said. My lips barely moved. Your father. James nodded. He wrote, we need to talk. Today. Luan stopped pretending to relax. Officer Thu down the road slowed his bike and watched without making a scene. I gripped James's fingers hard. You don't go alone. I won't, he promised. Then, softly, stubbornly, he added, but I'm not meeting him first. I blinked. James, what do you mean? He swallowed, and for a second, the man disappeared, and the sun showed. I'm going to speak to my mother, he said. Before I face him, I need truth from the person who didn't try to control it. It hit me in the chest. because I rarely heard him say my mother like she was real, like she was allowed to be loved. "She's nearby?" I asked. He nodded. I stayed away because it felt safer, but I'm tired of being managed from the shadows. His eyes flicked to the kindness corner jar, to Anna's sealed care cards. I'm not walking into his room without my own truth. Officer Thu rolled closer, voice calm but firm. "Go," he told James. "Luan stays with Diep. I'll keep an eye on this street." Then his gaze sharpened. "And if your father pushes papers at you, you sign nothing. Not a receipt. Not a simple form. Nothing." James nodded once. "Understood." He touched my cheek. 2 gentle fingers, a private vow. "I'll be back before dinner," he whispered. "I'm done letting silence hurt you." And then he left. I kept working because mothers don't get to fall apart when children will be home soon. But inside, my chest was tight, like I was holding my breath for hours. Luan stayed near the gate. Customers came and went. I smiled, handed over fruit, and felt the black sedan's presence like a shadow on my skin. Late afternoon, my phone buzzed. James. I pressed the phone to my ear, fingers shaking. "Talk to me," I whispered. I spoke to her," he said. His voice sounded different, rougher, softer at the same time. She didn't make excuses. She didn't rewrite anything. She just looked at me like I was still her son. My eyes stung. "And your father?" A pause. "He's waiting," James said. "But first, she gave me something. Something he never wanted me to keep." "What is it?" "I'll show you at home," he said. "Not at the shop. At home." When I stepped into the house, Anna was drawing hill fruits with a sun so big it swallowed the page. Nai toddled over and pressed her toy orange into my palm like an offering. I kissed their heads and tried to smile like my heart wasn't trembling. The front door opened. James stepped in carrying a long, wrapped package. Brown paper, tape, the unmistakable shape of a canvas. My pulse thudded. "That's from your mother," I said. He nodded, eyes glossy. "She saved it," he murmured. He called it childish. He didn't want it in my life. The kitchen fell quiet in that special way it does when something heavy enters the room. Anna's crayon paused. Luan hovered by the doorway, suddenly still. Even Nai went silent, thumb in her mouth, watching. James set the wrapped canvas on our table, the same table where Anna wrote blessings, where we peeled oranges for care baskets, where I'd once grabbed James's wrist and begged him not to carry fear alone. His fingers found the tape edge. They trembled. He looked at me, asking without words, "Are you with me?" I stepped close and covered his hand with mine. "I'm here," I whispered. "Whatever it is, we face it together." James swallowed, drew one shaky breath, and began to peel the tape. "Oh heavens, I can barely breathe." Before we see the resolution, please hit subscribe. The tape came off with a little rip that sounded too much like skin. James peeled the brown paper back, slow, careful. The kitchen was ordinary, crayons on the table, the faint scent of oranges, yet the air felt tight, like the house itself was bracing. When the canvas showed, My breath stopped. A small gate. A simple sign. 2 little figures tucked into a woman's legs. And beside them, a man standing slightly behind. Not owning, not towering, just there. A warm window spilling light. As if home was calling someone in. Anna whispered, "Is that us?" James stared until his eyes went wet. "It's what I wanted," he said, voice cracking. Before I learned wanting could get punished. Nye waddled close and patted his knee, as if she could press comfort straight into his bones. James crouched, held her for one long beat, then reached for the back of the canvas. "There's something," he murmured. A note was taped there. I peeled it loose with shaking fingers. James's mother's handwriting, steady, quiet. "I saved the parts of you he tried to throw away. Look at this before you listen to him. You were never his property. You were always my son." The words hit my chest like warm water on a burn. James read it once, twice. Then he closed his eyes like a man trying not to fall apart where children can see. His phone buzzed. He looked down, and the softness vanished from his shoulders. "He's here," he said. Outside, Officer Thu was already across the road, visible without being dramatic. Luan hovered near the doorway, silent and ready. A knock landed on the metal gate. 3 polite taps. James took my hand. "I'm not doing it the old way," he said. "The old way," my voice shook. Me obeying, me disappearing, me letting him decide who I'm allowed to be. He looked at the painting. "He doesn't come inside." James stepped out and closed the gate behind him. Through the window, I watched James's father stand in the street in his pressed shirt, smile smooth as glass. "So this is where you ran," James's father said. "This is where I live," James answered. His father's eyes flicked toward my window. "We need to talk about your future," he said, like he was discussing a project. "You don't make decisions without consulting me." "My future isn't yours," James said, a thin laugh. "Still sentimental," his father murmured. "Still attaching yourself to things that won't last." My stomach turned. Old shame tried to rise. Then I crushed it. I am not something to be evaluated. James took one step closer. "That's my family," he said low. "Watch how you speak." His father pulled out a thick envelope. "Tomorrow," he said. "You sign what I bring. You come back where you belong. This little village life, this shop, this woman, ends." James didn't touch the envelope. He turned his head and called, "Diep!" My heart jumped. I opened the door. James looked at me, steady, asking me to stand with him. "Bring it," he said. I carried the canvas out like it was fragile and holy. The moment James's father saw the painting, his face tightened. Recognition and irritation. Like he hated being reminded that a child once had a dream he couldn't control. James took the canvas and held it between them. "This is what I choose," he said. His father scoffed. "A childish picture," he snapped. "Your mother filled you with weakness." James's jaw clenched. "Don't talk about her." "She made you soft," his father hissed. "No," James said, clear as a bell. "She made me human." Silence. James tilted the canvas so the window's light was unmistakable. "You mocked this," he said. You tried to erase it. He lifted his chin. You didn't. She saved it, and I'm saving it. His father stepped forward, voice sharp. You're throwing your life away for... Stop, James said. One word, not loud, unmovable. His father's eyes narrowed. You think you can cut me off? James nodded once. I already did. You're just noticing. Across the road, Officer Thu shifted, present. Luan moved closer to the gate. The street felt awake behind curtains. James's father's smile finally cracked. This isn't over, he said. You'll regret refusing me. James didn't blink. I know what I'm refusing, he said. Love that comes with a leash. His father tucked the envelope back into his pocket like it insulted him to be denied. Then he turned and walked away. The black sedan rolled off our street as quietly as it arrived. Only when the taillights disappeared did I realize my throat hurt from holding my breath. James stood there a moment, staring down the road like he was watching an old fear retreat. Then he turned back to me, eyes wet, face exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with tonight and everything to do with being someone's son. I'm sorry, he whispered. For every time I made you carry fear alone. I pressed my forehead to his chest. His heartbeat was steady, proof he was here, not disappearing. I don't need you fearless, I whispered. I need you with us. His hand cradled the back of my head. I'm with you, he said. I choose you. I choose them. I choose this. Anna padded into the doorway with her blanket. Is the scary man gone? She asked. James crouched and opened his arms. Gone for tonight, he murmured. You're safe. Later, after the girls were asleep, we sat at the kitchen table. The painting leaned beside the lamp, that warm window glowing like a promise that refused to die. I slid one of Anna's care cards toward him. May your day feel lighter. James traced the words once, then picked up a pen. I want to write one, he said. For customers? I asked. For me, he said. For the part that still thinks love has to be earned. He wrote, folded the paper, and dropped it into the kindness corner jar. What did you write? I whispered. He looked at me, voice steady, gentle but not weak. You are allowed to choose a gentle life. My eyes filled. Not because everything was fixed, because he chose gentleness out loud. He reached for my hand. Tomorrow he may try again, he said. I squeezed back. Then we stand again. And for the first time since that black sedan arrived, my shoulders truly relaxed. Not because the threat was gone, but because James was no longer facing it alone.